Please welcome Randy from Applied Acceleration.
Thank you. Okay, well, we're going to shift gears a little bit. So we're going to talk about a topic that is really around change management, but this is really a little bit different in the sense that this is going to be about everything that I'm going to talk about is going to be about personal change as well as organizational or team change. So it's change management, but remember that everything we talk about today is going to be about what yourself, whether you want to change something in your own lives or whether you want to change something in your organization. So this is a little different take on change management. So what are we going to go over? I'll just quickly get into this. What is habituation? This might be a term you're familiar with, it might not be, but I wanted to make sure that we get into a little bit of understanding of what it is. Why is it difficult to overcome this kind of stagnation, this difficulty that we ultimately get into? We'll get into that in detail. How to get rid of it, in essence, how to see it to the door. Some traps to avoid, and one of the things I work with on clients is the fact that when we engage in some kind of process change, some kind of new technique, some new strategy, some new tactic, a lot of times we'll get these strategies in place, but we don't remove these obstacles that have been there forever or for a long time or are very difficult. And we'll get going, but we ultimately end up hitting that obstacle again. So I always actually coach clients to get rid of the obstacles first, and then we can get into the transformational part, because then you'll have a much faster, smoother piece to your transformation, to your change management. And we'll get into a quick summary / plan so you have some takeaways from when you walk out of here. So this is a little, I'm not going to say who this quote is from. I'll tell you later, maybe if somebody's over a drink. But I love this quote. And so just try to keep an open mind as we go through this, because it's a little different take on change management. And I wanted to make sure that we all keep an open mind about it. I normally don't include this, but I'm a little bit different group. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of quick history on me, a little background. I'm the military. That has a bearing on the sense that I have some discipline piece in my background. It's not any reason why you would listen to me today. 25 years in sales and marketing. I had hair when I started, so that's how long ago it was. 25 years. This is up there, not as some bravado thing, but I worked for a very large company that was actually was catering to your group. When I first started in sales, I became the top salesperson out of a very large group. The reason I bring that up is from the very beginning of my career, I've really worked on transforming organizations, changing organizations, dealing with difficulty in organizations. I've been EVP of sales and marketing at 6 different companies. One of those was a company called Pantelis, and Pantelis is actually very much of a sister company to Olemica. It was until it was sold to Perfect Commerce, which I helped shepherd. But it was catering to the utility industry, to the electric industry. And if you think change is hard in organizations like large chemical companies, try the utility industry. So, also I've been consulting, coaching, training for the last decade. Everything from, I work a lot in Austin, that's where my office is at, from startups, well-funded startups, to Fortune 100 companies. So I go all over the world doing this, so it's a lot of fun. But the bottom line is, for this particular topic, is that I have seen every kind of dysfunction there is. I'll see whatever crazy dysfunction, your top dysfunction that you've ever seen, and I'll raise it by 3. We can talk about it over a drink later. I have seen it all, and I can tell you there's a lot of things that you have to learn how to deal with when you're trying to get something new into a company. So I'm going to bring that to bear when we have our discussion here. So what is habituation? Habituation is when you introduce a stimulus into your environment, whatever that stimulus is. You're usually very, very aware of that stimulus initially, and then that fades over time. And one of the examples that I always use is if you're going to buy a house. Everybody's bought a house, and before you buy that house, you have a list of things that you absolutely, positively cannot move into this house unless these get changed, right? Not going to move. It's going to get into it. And about 2/3 of that list doesn't get done before we move in. But you get used to the crack in the wall, the ceiling fan that rattles, the bathroom and light switches that are switched, the fan and light switches that are switched in the bathrooms. You get used to that. You become habituated to the dysfunction. And we do that personally. I do it. We all do it. We do it organizationally as well. We just get used to the dysfunction. And it's very difficult to see once we become used to it. And what it is, in essence, is it's stagnation. But we don't even see the stagnation. And that's what's so difficult, and that's what makes it so hard to change, is we don't see it. So a really smart guy said, we are what we repeatedly do. And we all know that's the case. We've seen this happen over and over and over again in our own organizations. But a lot of times, that what we repeatedly do isn't a good thing. So habituation can be positive and negative. We'll get into both. So why should you care? I mean, what does it matter to you or your organization? Well, one thing is you can be stuck personally, organizationally, even your family. You can be stuck and you won't even know it. And that's the tough part about this, is you won't even know it. And sometimes it takes a third party to come in and see it. The biggest part of this is you're leaving all kinds of productivity, revenue growth, personal growth on the table. I see this all the time. I see clients every week where this is just so evident, and it's so evident to you when you walk into other organizations that just seem so obvious to you, but they become habituated to what they're dealing with. And ultimately, competitors will leave you behind, and customers as well, because they're learning and growing, and maybe you aren't. So that's one thing we want to try to change today. So why does change seem so difficult? Why does it seem like that guy, right? It always seems so painful and difficult, and we always struggle with it organizationally. We are literally hardwired to resist change. And what's interesting is there's a ton of research on this, and I really get into this, and we don't have time to dive into some of the really interesting research on this, but we are literally hardwired to resist change. And there's a lot of good reasons why we are. So just a bit of research here. A 2010 study showed that heart disease patients who had undergone this traumatic bypass surgery were advised that they had to adjust their lifestyle or they were going to die, okay? Or at least have this very horrible surgery again. Now, dying seems like a pretty good incentive to me. Not dying, right? I mean, that's up there in your top 3, it should be. So here's the results. Only 9% modified their behavior, okay? You're gonna die if you don't do this. And that still didn't get you to change. So we could see why this is a little difficult to overcome, personally and professionally and organizationally. But why does this happen? Because our brains work to conserve energy. They want to create habits, habituation, because it conserves energy. And our brain doesn't care whether they're good or bad. It just wants to conserve energy. And we're creatures of habit. We may not realize it, but almost everything you've done today is a part of is habitual. So, and your brain doesn't care whether it's a good habit or a bad habit. It has no recognition of good or bad. It simply wants conservation of energy. And research shows that over 55% of your entire day, every day, is habit. So, you know, that's sometimes very, very good. That can help us. Because if you're driving down the road and you're not looking at everything and you're concentrating on the road, that's out of habit. You don't realize how difficult, if you remember back when you were 16 trying to figure out all the things that were going on, it took a lot of concentration. You don't have to do that now, so that's a good habit that you've developed. And there's tons and tons of good habits, but obviously along with that there's bad ones. And they can hold us back from success, especially as an organization. I see this every week, week in and week out, that this is one of the primary reasons that holds a company back from succeeding. And once they're established, and we all know this in our personal lives especially, it's very difficult to break. We know that personally and professionally. So how can we change this, rather, when our minds and our organizations, which ultimately is just a bunch of people. So we have to remember that. There is no such thing as this organization, this company. It's just a bunch of people. And these people have these issues, and we need to be able to address them. It's not really that simple. It's going to seem simple. I'm going to put some simple steps up here, but it's not easy. It's a very difficult thing to deal with. First of all, we have to recognize and address habituation. That's a challenge in and of itself. It's actually, I do very deep dive assessments and optimization plans for companies all the time. So I go in and look at the underbelly of tons and tons of companies, and I see this as one of the more difficult ones to deal with. We just really don't like to look at ourselves organizationally or personally with much scrutiny. We have to create and integrate a new process. Integrate is obviously emphasized because we do all kinds of plans. We create all kinds of plans, but we rarely execute, integrate them the way we've set out to. So that's a big, big part of it. That's probably one of the primary reasons we all have, 3 chapters read in a book, or projects get halfway through and then bombed out. It's because we didn't integrate them. And this is tough, and Paul referenced this earlier, is that it's just really hard work. So we need to get used to that, because anything worthwhile is going to take some work anyway. And so you have to put in the effort, and most of us just simply are just stretched to the limits, and we don't want to deal with any kind of change, so we resist this part of it. But you really have to put the effort in, and it's always, always worth it. I've never seen a case in my entire career where it hadn't been, literally. And if you don't succeed at it, and you tend to put it off, and you blow off the reading the book or whatever it happens to be, that becomes a habituation. That becomes a habit as well. And then it just feeds on itself, and it becomes a cycle, and then we don't see it anymore, and it becomes very, very difficult to change. But let's also do something here that is a way of viewing change that might help. Let's change our view of change. Instead of change, let's just call it improvement. Everybody can improve. I mean, we all wouldn't say, no, I just can't improve. There's no possibility of me improving. So we know organizationally and personally we can improve. So if we just substitute those words, I think we'll do good. Failure, let's substitute testing. Because in essence, that's really what it is. We're just testing whether something succeeds or doesn't succeed. And it's not a failure. It just simply is one of those things that didn't work. So we need to continue to test and find those things that do. And instead of discipline, consistency, and we're going to get into this in a little bit when I get into some of the methodology around this, but consistency is extremely important in how we change personally and organizationally. So how do we overcome this, this big-time, impenetrable effort into our organizations? The first part of it is extremely difficult, and this is something that you really have to be very focused on to make sure that you want to do this, and that's to really honestly and candidly examine yourself or your organization. That's a tough thing to do. It sometimes takes some outside help, and it's very difficult to do alone because we can't see what we don't see as broken. So we have to have some help sometimes for someone outside of our organization or within our organization that can help us, that's in another area, or friends, or whatever it happens to be. You need someone else sometimes to help you see what needs to be changed. Now this is simple, and this is, people will go, ah, yeah, I know this, I've seen this 100 times. But creating milestones and rewards associated with those milestones is probably one of the most researched things I'll talk about. There's all kinds of really neat research about this where they have monkeys hooked up with little blackberry juice going into their mouth, and they see figures on screens, and they hit this button to recognize that figure, and they get a reward and so on. And they actually have an anticipation of this. They've done it with humans, all sorts of research around this. This is an absolutely proven aspect of how change is implemented, organizationally and personally. So organizationally, we're not talking about giving rewards like giving out, Starbucks gift cards or something all the time, but recognizing advancement, achievement, emails out, plotting some advancement, letting the team know that, Dave, you've hit this new milestone, but there needs to be a lot of them. And so this is a huge part of what most people in their organizations don't do. They tend to look at a beginning of a project, maybe midway, and at the end of a project, and that's it. But you need to break that down into a lot of milestones to really be effective. And at the end, there needs to be a big reward. because this is learned behavior. This is positive reinforcement. This is huge. This is part of how the military operates as well. It's just constantly doing this repetition, and it's just positive reinforcement in this case. And it works. This is just a major, major area of study that's really fascinating. The other thing, I go into companies all the time and I'll say, hey, what's your plan? We're gonna do this new business management change. We're gonna do this big transformational change in our organization. We've got this new initiative. Where's the plan for that? Well, you know, they have an outline or they have something email they've sent out, but there's not really a plan. Something this important to yourself or your organization is critical to have a written plan, something in writing that everybody understands and can get behind. Maintaining momentum is huge in this part of how we're going to continue a process of change, a process of improvement. So one of the things about momentum that we have to remember, and this is what I talked about earlier with consistency is really the fuel for momentum. And if you really think about that, that's how momentum is created and that's how it's maintained. So we really have to remember that momentum is key, and on the other side of that is not losing that momentum. Because we all know what happens when we lose that momentum. It becomes very deflating, it becomes a big roadblock for that project, for that personal change, whatever it happens to be. If you lose momentum, we all know this, if you're exercising and you lose momentum, how hard is it to get back and go back into exercising? You know, we all have dealt with something like that. We understand how difficult that is. So maintaining the momentum is huge. Traps, these obstacles that we definitely want to avoid. I'll start with probably the one that we hear, and I certainly see the most, is whenever you come in with a new project or a new idea, we always have this guy, right? We all have him in our organization. We tried this, doesn't work, we're never gonna do it again, right? So, I understand. So therefore, we should just stop. We should never ever try to improve again and just give it up. I mean, that's really what we're saying when we say something like that, organizationally or personally. It's just amazing to me that that's still used as an excuse. And we really can't do that, because that's going to ultimately be the weakest link in your personal or organizational chain. The naysayers, right? Have that can't-do attitude. We have these folks in every organization. I deal with it daily. We all have these people in our companies or our lives that we don't have the budget, we don't have the time, we don't have the resources, we don't have the bandwidth, we don't have this, we don't have that. Some of these are obviously very, very viable and real reasons, but there's something that we have to get into with this, which is, the course I teach, which is kind of a turning time management on its head a little bit, because you can't manage time. So time is fixed, is fixed, you can't manage it, you can only manage your choices. And so what we're saying when we say that we can't do this, when we have all these naysayers, is those are the choices that we've made. We've made different choices, and we can't run away from the fact that we have made those choices. And those choices result in whatever we're dealing with at the time. So if you want to make new choices, you can. But you have to recognize the fact that you are making choices. So this is a slide I love to use, because there's a common thread with all of these people, and you'll know all of these people. You know, Leonardo da Vinci, Mother Teresa, Michael Jordan. There's a common thread with everybody. Galileo, right? All of these people, these unbelievably successful and interesting and in some cases brilliant people, all had one thing in common. They all had 24 hours a day, just like you and me. But they made different choices. And so you can too. It's just a matter of deciding which choices you're going to make and taking control of those choices personally and organizationally. We just need to recognize that those choices are being made. You may not look at them as choices, but you are making those choices every single day. So planning around the vastly improved future self. So I tend to try to stay fit and so on and try to eat well. But a couple of weeks ago, I was just starving, and not starving for something good, starving for some of that stuff that's up there in that candy thing up there, that kind of thing. And I've done pretty good about keeping the house pretty clean of that. But I have an 8-year-old son, and so there's some stuff around. I'm rummaging through it to find it, and I find these Fig Newtons. And you know those Fig Newtons, the double pack, you know, the kind of extra big ones. So and 100 calories on those things. I'm like, okay, I'm just good. And I wolf one of those down, 2, 3, 4 of those packs down. Then I'm throwing this 4th pack away, and I realize that that's 100 calories, and there's 2 servings in that. I mean, who opens a pack of Fig Newtons and saves one for later or something? So I just chunked down 800 calories, and I was like, oh man, I can't believe that. But you know what? I'm going to work out twice tomorrow. I'm going to work out twice tomorrow, even though I haven't worked out twice in a day since like never. So what we ultimately do is we project our future selves and our future organizations as having these superpowers. We're going to be more moral, we're going to be more effective, we're going to be more efficient. You need to plan around your current self organization / team. So this was great, is recognizing the Dunning-Kruger effect. So Dunning-Kruger are these really smart guys at Stanford who study actually incompetent people and how incompetent people tend to have a view of themselves and their opinions that is much, much higher than it really actually is. This is scientifically measured. And very, very competent people tend to have a more subdued view, a more humble view of their own capabilities. And they actually started this research because this guy who robbed a bank, this is all, you can look this all up, this is all just absolutely incredible research, but he put lemon juice all over himself because he had read that lemon juice was used in invisible ink. And so if he goes in front of these security cameras, he wouldn't be seen. And so these guys actually started the research based on that. So unfortunately, the people who are the loudest voices sometimes have this effect going on. And so we have to be cognizant of that just because somebody is so absolutely sure of it, maybe we ought to examine how well their opinions are formed. And I'd go through 10 more of these if we have time. They're just great. Love this kind of research. So just kind of wrapping this up, remember to have a plan. This is so key. If you know, we're going to change our organization, we're going to do this, we're going to implement this. If you really don't have a plan, it's just simply not going to, almost certainly, I should say, it's not going to be effective. It's not going to be as effective as it could be if you did have a plan. So you really, really have to have a plan. So I want to really emphasize this because I can't tell you, this is the part that people skip most often because we don't want to do it. We'll say we're going to do it, right? And we'll blow it off. So we want to make sure that we have a plan. Get rid of the obstacles first. Remember I talked about that earlier, is that if you remove the obstacles first, and it seems like you first want to get going and then remove these obstacles, but if you remove these obstacles first, you'll actually have a much smoother and faster and more effective transition if you just get rid of those first. And remember that most obstacles are associated with people. Almost everything you notice I talked about is with people. It's not with fixing some organizational process or something that is external to people. It's people. We're just a bunch of people in our organization, so it's very people-oriented. Work at consistently hitting these milestones. And when you do that, that momentum gets created, and this thing will roll, and you will see change in your organization, improvement, it's like you've never seen before. I've seen it in so many different companies. I could sit up here and just give you some great, great examples of how companies have transformed and just become unbelievably successful where it looked like they were going to be failures. And have lots of milestones with those rewards. And remember, this is, we all talk about, dreams. I don't want to get soft here on this kind of stuff, but I like to wrap up with something like this. We all have dreams, personal, professional, family, whatever it happens to be, and they influence what we're capable of. But ultimately, habits determine how our lives turn out. And that's why this is so incredibly important for you personally and for you, your teams, and for your organization. So just try to keep that in mind, that when you're talking about habituation and getting rid of it and trying to overcome some of these obstacles, that this will help you personally and professionally. So, I've got a minute for some questions here. Does anybody have any questions about something that they're dealing with in their organizations as far as change goes? Any Aggies in here? Oh, God. Okay, thank you.